Hi everyone, welcome to EFA Lunchtime studio visit. Today we have the pleasure of having one of our studio member, Sophie Kahn, right now live from Australia. And
I'm in Brooklyn.
in Brooklyn. And also we have the pleasure. So Sophie has a show right now that's on Mozilla Hub that was supposed to happen at the Pfizer building in Brooklyn, and now it's in a virtual realm, and which was made facilitated by and curated by Isabella Anastasio, our curator, which we have the pleasure also here joining us today. So yeah, can you tell us a little bit about how the show, like what's the show? Can you lead us through the hub and
Yeah, absolutely. So I'll start my screen share now actually, so we can see the space while we're talking.
yes.
And actually I'm just gonna take us back to the main room very quickly.
Everyone should go and check out this show because it's so accessible and like COVID.
I will share the link. Yeah, I'll share the link. So it's been by appointment only up until now, and that's solely because I've really been enjoying making everybody who sees it have to interact with me. But I think it's time to make it public now. Yes, so welcome. The virtual space that we're standing in is a reconstruction of this first space. I will say is a reconstruction of an exhibition that was originally supposed to. It had two kind of failures to launch, sadly. I like to think of it as the tree that fell in the woods and that nobody ever saw, nobody ever heard. Firstly, well, Bella, if you want to talk about how you first found my work and how we first met.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm a student at the School of Visual Arts MA in curatorial practice, and part of my requirement for my first year of study there is to put on an exhibition. We're given free reign. They just give us a budget and a Chelsea gallery to put it up in. And I found Sophie originally through the EFA. I was doing some research and looking through the artists that were there at the time, and Sophie's work really called out to me. So I did a studio visit with her and asked her if she would be in the exhibition, and it was originally supposed to go up in the Chelsea Gallery in I think March 12th or 13th.
Yeah, March. Yes.
Of 2020, and
so that was that didn't happen, obviously.
Yeah, event for the school shut down the day before it was supposed to open because of the coronavirus, and then we kept postponing it until January of this past year, where we finally put it up in a physical space at, ironically, the Pfizer building in Brooklyn, but it was another just failure because I think maybe total 5 people saw it.
It was fully up, like that show, January show was fully up.
It was installed, yeah. And it looked quite a bit like what we're seeing here. This space is a slightly glamorized version of it in that I've painted the walls my preferred charcoal grey, and the works have some nice framing and but basically this is how the space looked. And I worked with a really terrific Mozilla Hub's designer, Phil Mullican, who deserves credit for building out this space here. He and I collaborated on the architectural design, and he did the texturing and most of the 3D modeling for the architecture. But the works that are installed here are all kind of native 3D works. They're made from 3D laser scans of Buteau performance that I collaborated with during a residency at Pioneer Works in Red Hook in Brooklyn a couple of years ago. The 3 performers in this space that you can see, all the acknowledgements are by the wall, but they're Cindy Butts, Azumi Oe, and then Chris Carlone appears in one of the sculptures too. So they're all made from real bodies, and they've all been, as the title says, they've been dematerialized, kind of fragmented and sent into the space of the internet. And there is a lot of loss that happens to the body along the way. And that's really been a very ongoing theme throughout my work, is the way that technology really fails to see the body, but the poetics of that failure. And the kind of strange and unintended emotional resonances that you get when you are trying to perfectly capture the human body and failing to do so. The scanner that I work with is really not designed to see the body at all, and so it generates these fragments and these errors. And over the years, I've just kind of really fallen in love with that aesthetic and continued to use it in all my work.
What is the scanner again?
It's called a Pulpimus. It's a handheld 3D laser scanner. So they use it a lot in the movie industry and for props, not really so much for people. So I'm very much using it kind of against the grain. All right, so that's this first space here, just to kind of recap. And I love some of these details. I really wanted it to feel like the Pfizer space, which is a little bit grungy. I love the kind of duct ceiling. I love the fluorescent lights, the piping. That was all retained deliberately. But then the idea is from there that a kind of portal opens up and you come through this like vast doorway. It's a little hard to describe the scale, and I should say that you can visit this exhibition on an Oculus headset, or it should be compatible with most of the mainstream headsets out there.
Which I really recommend people guys to try out with the headset, because that really has the full scale and you feel
absolutely if they have the option, I highly recommend it, because you can see, like, as my avatar, as I walk up to this sculpture, it looks pretty small in the browser. And when I get up close, you can see that the pedestal is at my eye level. And so then I look up to see the piece. But in a headset, you really feel that, and it kind of towers above you. So scale in the browser is really tough. It's like we've all had that experience of buying something on the internet and you get it and it's completely the wrong size in your house. So it's kind of like that, writ large. Because I've never made monumental work. I've made a few life-size pieces, but in this type of digital fabrication, it's incredibly expensive and incredibly time-consuming. And then, storage and crating and customs and shipping, it's really challenging. And so it was actually really liberating for me as a kind of 3D digital sculpture for once to not have to worry about, fundraising. In fact, Bella, we were able to use the money that the school had set aside for beer at the opening and paper flyers to pay the Hub's designer, right? Like that it ended up covering almost all of his rate. I think it was a better use of the money.
By not having
buying beer for students, they could anyway. So then, these spaces are all imaginary. These works are all, I have 3D scans for them, but they have not been made in the physical world. They only exist as digital assets.
Do you think even before some of your older work, when you were talking about your sculpture, they're kind of standing on, it kind of has the same texture, this kind of flaky 3D scanned texture.
Exactly.
On like the wooden or some kind of structure, was it?
Yeah, the support structures, absolutely. Yeah, those works are all 3D printed actually in one piece. That can all be seen on my site too. That they're the first things that people will see if they go to the sculpture page on my site. But I hand paint them. The physical object and the material surfaces of things, it really always has been important to me. And so that's why it took me a long time, actually, like we were saying earlier, I was dragged kicking and screaming into exhibiting virtual work. And I really just spent a lot of time just like grieving for the fact that I had to, I was temporarily moved out of my studio. I wasn't working with models anymore in my space. Working with models had brought my work so much like energy, it just invigorated it, and the collaborations were so wonderful. And all of a sudden I was back to like just me again. My kids, my family, they won't let me scan them. They're like, forget it. They're not interested. They don't even sit still. That was really hard. And it was, we made this show and then we sort of made it, closed it. And it was only when my advisor from grad school at SCIC, Claudia Hart, who's been a longtime friend and mentor, had mentioned that she was working in Hubs, and that for all the sacrifices that you make in terms of the resolution, these are a lot smoother. They have a lot more detail as a real 3D print, or even my original file. Like, it's like a video game. It's got to be very low polygon for it to load fast in the web. But Hubs is social, and we've had like events in this space, we've had meetups, we've had tours with groups. We did a live stream with Azumi and Cindy last night where they performed. So there's a lot that you can do. And my feeling is like, especially now, it's maybe not, it's not ideal, but it is better. It's a lot better than nothing. It's kind of generally my feeling about like, you know, virtual exhibitions. Like it is a lot better than nothing.
Yeah, for sure. This looks, it's like a new experience. Like it's totally different than a physical show. And but it's so smart that you still have the exit sign. Like I was looking at the exit door.
Oh yes, some of these, there's a lot of little jokes in here that I really had fun with. I mean, you know, for starters, why do they need to be on pedestals, right? Like they don't weigh anything. A lot of the show is my thinking about like weight and gravity and bridging. This is really a bridge show for me. This is like taking my practice from the physical to the virtual. So I'm still using like the language of museums, like very, you know, this space is actually modeled after Daniel Libeskind's Denver Museum of Art, where the interior has this paneled ceiling, and then it has nothing is on the 90 degrees, which felt very appropriate for the sort of polygons of my work, and also this sense that you're entering this kind of bizarro world. You know, you step from the real world into this other strange kind of realm. So, but then there are things you can do. You know, I can fly around this 100-foot sculpture. Like I can't build a 100-foot sculpture that people can fly around in New York City or anywhere. So people interact with the file in a more intimate way, I think, and that's become really interesting to me. And I can talk more about how that's been informing my practice in the way that I'm exhibiting, you know, a bit later.
No, for sure. It does not, like, you're not trying to make a physical show, which is something that's great. Like I wonder what, like, how much the decision was from Bella's side, from the curator's side, like what that experience is like. Were you contributing to like the spatial aspect, or like whose decision was it to bring the sculpture in the middle of the room and suspend it, like from the?
Yes, Sophie and Phil really took a lot of the curatorial work on the virtual show. It was mostly just an amazing learning experience.
Wow.
For me, yeah, like Sophie would include me in the conversations, but every time, you know, like I would kind of suggest something and she would say, well, don't you think this would be better? And I was just like, yeah, that would be way better.
I'm
like,
sorry.
no, like I really, like, this is my first time ever doing anything like this, and I would have no idea what I was doing. So yeah, Sophie really took the lead on most of it, and it was fantastic from my perspective, seeing like this kind of little, very contained and very traditional thing that I had been working on turn into a really great learning experience that's so fitting for the times.
Hold that thought. I've just got to save this screen recording. It's got a 15-minute limit, not on Zoom, but on my other recorder. If you don't mind pausing just for a second, I'm just saving that now, and then I can record another 15.
And we can cut this part and then put this.
Yeah, I'll send you all the files.
A time thing. We passed the half mark for timing.
Yeah. That should be. This is 15 exactly.
Yeah.
Because it just cut me off. So yeah, give me 1 more minute to save it.
Sure.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's tricky too, because I think that like maybe I should wait to kind of continue this part of the conversation, but you know, when you're navigating 3D, it's like a lot of those decisions were made looking at a 3D model. And even I struggled too. It's very hard to look at a 3D model that somebody sent you and actually picture like where the sightlines are going to be, you know, like what is it going to be like in space? I've been doing 3D for 15 years, and those tools are not designed for that. So yeah, it's no fault of yours, Bella, that was like somewhat confusing, because it's a flaw in all of this software that's not actually really designed for like a human. Do you know what I mean?
Oh, totally.
Yeah.
It's perfect for the theme of the show too. That awkwardness and adjusting to this new space.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, thank you. So yeah, that does remind me that we were talking before we started recording about you know, like people's instincts in virtual shows. Like one instinct is to just completely reconstruct a museum space with no more imagination than that, which seems a bit silly. And then another instinct is to make it like incredibly grand and just do like Damien Hirst style budget, or, you know, I'm going to texture all of this in like pink Iranian onyx, you know, and it'll be $1 zillion show. And you sort of think like, even if I had $1 zillion, like that's still ugly. Like I'm not going to spend my money on that, even if it's my imaginary money, my like internet monopoly money that doesn't exist. So, but it was a learning. I've never done a virtual show before. I've never ever shown web-based work, and I've always like been really, really admired artists who did. And I always considered myself a sculptor. And so one thing that I think that's been really interesting about this year and about some of the other projects that I'm working on now is that for the first time, I think people have the tools to interact with a 3D file without it being like a print necessarily, without it having a physical existence, whether that's like collecting an NFT, whether that's seeing it in Hubs or in Unity. You know, and there's another artist whose work I love. She's become a friend too, like during the pandemic. Aurea Harvey, who's got a show up right now at Bitforms. I'm a huge fan of her work. It's beautiful. And she's got a similar practice where she scans and models and sculpts and then also builds real things. And she said something to me that I just keep thinking about. She says, you know, she's like, to me, the file is the work first. She says, I fall in love with the work in the form of the file, and I'm like interacting with the file, you know, on my screen, sculpting it, working with it. And I love that. And there's always kind of compromises in making a sculpture. And I never used to feel that way. And I kind of am starting to, because I think that people have noticed on just the experience of interacting with these forms in hubs is so different from walking around a 3D printed sculpture in a gallery, that you can get very more intimate. Like you can go inside them. I can take you like inside some of these and you can like look through them, you know, from like you can see.
Oh wow.
Yeah. A totally different, you know, this is not something that you could do in a physical exhibition ever. Or you can kind of like see behind things, and you know, there's a very different,
like touching the artwork, like the
yeah, it's a really different interaction. There's the fact that you can like fly up to the ceiling and see them from above. And then in VR, I think this is somewhat magnified, although in VR, the interaction, you are moving with your body. And unless you've got all the kind of gestures down, you know, like I still don't, it doesn't feel quite the same. It's a much more, in VR, you feel like you're walking in a physical space that you're just happen to be seeing on the headset. But I'm coming around to that, and I'm doing 2 more shows now, 2 online shows that have virtual components. One doesn't have a physical component at all. It's going to be a sculpture that's in AR. It's a kind of ghostly, translucent sculpture that like barely exists actually in the AR space. And that's kind of my way of thinking about the NFT, about something that you're buying that has no, it's like putting your hand through sand, you know, it's like, it feels like it barely exists in the world. And so I'm making this ghostly thing, just like that hovers in between like physicality and non-physicality. But yeah, that we called this show Dematerialized, and it felt really apt. And it also took me back to thinking about, you know, the separation of the soul and body, like really old ways of thinking about what happens when you leave the physical body, and what are we beyond the physical body too.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. Like I have 2 questions that I was thinking looking at this. One is, are these scans taken like way before pandemic? Was these something that you've always saved, or something that you've taken during it, or something?
No,
like,
pre-COVID. Yes, there. It was from a public event. Yeah, there were like hundreds of people coming through Pioneer Works, and I was very close with the models. Again, yeah, that video documentation, I don't have it handy, but it is on my Instagram under the 3D scanning story highlights. So there's quite a lot of video of that event. It wasn't a performance really, it was a sort of work in process showing, because Pioneer Works second Sundays, they open up the studios, and since I was a tech resident, I didn't have a studio space there, but I did this as a kind of event, and people could see the process. And I was streaming my my screen, what I was seeing in the scanning software to a screen that was behind me, so people were watching it through the windows. And I've done now, like I am in a group show, another Hubs group show, and I did a live stream performance where I was being 3D scanned, and we live streamed that data to a screen in this virtual space, which was really interesting. That was in Milan. So there were like 100 people, mostly visitors, mostly from Italy, who were seeing that. And I'm in my home in New York, like casting just the scan, and you just saw the body appearing. The details for that are on my website too. You can still see the video actually.
Wow. So like what your original idea for them, like before pandemic and everything, was it to do the same mounting, like 3D printing and mounting them on something?
Yes, I mean, this is the dream, is to make them this scale. And that is still something that I want to do in the real world. And I'm like always actively looking for opportunities in terms of, public art, sculpture gardens. It's expensive and logistically really challenging. In the meantime, I am making these bas reliefs. So like this relief sculpture here, you can see it has a little bit of a depth to it on the side. And
so like
yeah,
the body structure is being relieved. Is that
exactly, yeah. And then the first iteration was these. So these are some small reliefs that I did make as real pieces. So these are really in the gallery. They're on granite. They're translucent 3D prints mounted on granite. Yeah. And then these prints too. So that's another kind of iteration of them. The resolution in Hubs is not wonderful, but again, it can all be seen on my site.
Wow, cool. Yeah, like just this thing, especially the couple of rooms in the back, like are really, I think, what speaks a lot about our time and our being confined and being like we have to like think through different ways. And I feel like that's kind of why people are now into NFTs and things that are intangible, because like touch is forbidden.
Yeah, I think there's a lot to unpack with the thing around NFTs. I mean, I think the exciting part for me is the fact that we've been trying to figure out how to pay artists royalty resale for 100 much longer. There's never been a good way to do it. And my feeling has always been the art world can lock down anything. The art world can sell anything. Like 20 years ago, you would have thought like nobody's going to pay $10,000 for like a limited edition DVD, and yet here we are. 50 years ago, or 100 years ago, nobody's going to buy a limited edition photograph because you've got a negative. You can just print more. There are always ways to like create artificial scarcity around works that in theory are infinitely manufacturable. I think the cryptocurrency speculation element is somewhat unfortunate. And I have the shows that I'm participating in like do not happen on the Ethereum blockchain. And so they're not using the proof of work algorithm, which is the one that we all hear about completely destroying or any attempt you make at like reducing your carbon footprint over the past 5 years. You can like nuke all of that with like minting one NFT. But there are ways of doing it. And I think there are some shows that are coming out that are like really thoughtful and kind of taking into account the conceptual bizarreness of it all. But I mean, it's kind of interesting to see the art world catching up with the world of finance, like, and because think about the immateriality of any financial product, like stocks. I was having a conversation today, like the best analogy is a stock. What is a stock? You can make as many of them as you want. They're unlimited in a way. They don't give you anything. You don't guarantee anything. You don't own anything. All it is placing a bet that it might be worth more money. And that's basically an NFT, in my understanding of it anyway, which is very new. And again,
yeah, I wonder, do you think like your work after this, right, after we get out of lockdown soon, and is this kind of virtual RAM work existing, a sculpture existing? Because you were saying you're very much of a sculptor.
Yeah.
Is that something?
I don't know.
assume that position as the
I don't know. I don't know. I mean, I'm like just got my second vaccine, you know, so in theory, like my kid's not. So I feel like until everyone in my household is vaccinated, I'm not going to be taking any risks. But yeah, and somebody asked me that about the exhibition the other day. They're like, okay, this is a VR show. How do you imagine somebody experiencing this in an art museum? They're like, oh, you walk into an art museum and there's a headset, but what else is there? And like just the thought of walking into an art museum kind of gave me the heebie-jeebies, and I couldn't even like answer that. I've been very careful, more so than some because I have a high-risk child, and so you know I'm going to make a slower re-entry, I think, into the world. But yeah, I mean, I think it's going to have to, but perhaps that will be something a little more abstract. You know, perhaps that'll be like continuing to do virtual shows, but also really trying to do physical shows and being very careful about the overlap between the two. And it might just be also more start reflecting in like a more ethereal quality, like a lighter weight quality in the works, a sort of less weighty feeling of how they're kind of installed, and then thinking about maybe more creative ways that they can be seen. Because the other really interesting thing too with virtual shows is that they open up art to people who have all kinds of limitations, you know, to people who have mobility limitations, to people who don't live in a geographic centre like New York. The Australian government is continuing to invest very, very heavily in it. Like, because I was in Australia during the lockdown in Melbourne last summer, and because a lot of it is government funded and the government arts funding is a little more generous in terms of its objective, it really is about trying to democratize access to the arts. There's not much funding, but you know, the people who are there have their hearts in the right place, the people within the institutions, you know, museums and curators. And that's been the number one thing that they've talked about, is like the people who've been able to access their programming who have physical mobility or like geographic restriction in terms of not being able, or maybe they work full time, they don't have their whole weekend to swan around a gallery, you know. So I think there really is a democratization of it that can be kind of taken advantage of if you do it the right way.
Is that kind of how you're thinking your work? Like, do you think this is like the up-to-date representation of your practice? Like, what are your
I've got a few more. No, I've got a few more projects on the boil that are not done. And in particular, I have one project that's right in the middle of the EFA that also got, you know, paused by the pandemic, which was that I was working with models who were female identified, you know, however they wanted to define that, who'd been through a major physical transformation, and I just had like amazing stories and like really amazing conversations with all the people who came through my space. One woman who was like a double mastectomy patient, that she found out she was a carrier of the BRCA gene, and so she had preventative surgery, and I have before and after scans of her. One who was like 8 months pregnant with twins, an eating disorder survivor, and I had all these amazing conversations. So I was going in a very like portrait oriented direction. But I couldn't complete that series because all of a sudden I couldn't work with people anymore. So that's something I'm really keen to get back to. And those would be life-size sculptures. So those I'm fundraising for now. But then I do think that I'll keep up the virtual part of my practice for sure. Maybe a little more separated, or maybe not, you know. I feel like we have to see what way the art world is going to head as well.
No, I'm super looking forward to that, because like you're like of you kind of coming to terms with both your practice in sculpture, like physical form and virtual form, because like I feel like from what I've heard is like you really kind of hit the stride during pandemic with virtual space.
Yeah,
shows coming up too, right?
I do. I have a couple more online shows coming up. Yeah. Sorry, it's in my second 15-minute cut. I'm going to save this one. I just want to be sure I'm saving everything for you. So it's.
I think we can definitely wrap it up. It's
3. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I think in the end, I'm just going to ask you about your upcoming shows, and then we'll wrap that.
Yeah, sounds good. Okay, I'll stop my screen share. And then okay, Zoom is still recording. So
Great.
from here we can rely on the Zoom recording because it's just faces. Yeah. So yeah, the upcoming shows.
Okay, I'm gonna rephrase that. So yeah, thank you for showing. No. What was I saying before? uh, and yeah, like you have some upcoming shows on in virtual spaces
Yes,
also.
I do. There's opening towards the end of the month. There's a show curated by Julie Walsh with Casey Reyes's online feral file exhibition program. There's a couple that are slightly in the works, so I'm going to put all the information on the news page on my site. On my website, if you go to the web and VR section, I'm going to post a link to this exhibition now because it's being made public as of this evening. And then there's also a link to the group show that's also done in Mozilla Hubs with Meet Digital Art Centre in Milan, also curated by Julie Walsh, and that's called Synthetic Corporeality. And that is a really expansive, it's a large group show of artists working in hubs. It's like myself, Martina Menegon, Carla Ganis, Claudia Hart, Tamiko Thiel, Aurea Harvey, and a number of really wonderful artists, and they've all built subworlds. So not only do they have a work installed in the show, but they have an entire little world that you can explore. So I recommend that people take, like an hour to visit that show. And then I've done live events in this space, and so I'm also going to post the documentation from those. And then possibly reprise the Buteau performance with me, perhaps. So all of that will be on my site and on my Instagram if people want to look.
And Bella, for Dematerialized, when does this show end?
We have oh no, it's not Wednesday, it's Friday. Next Thursday we have the last event. Sophie's going to give an artist talk in the space, and then I mean, can it last technically forever?
Yeah,
but
it can live on Hubs forever, but the link may come down. So yeah, I encourage people to check it out while the link is up. But they can also book a tour with me if they want a private tour, and that link is on the front page of my site too.
Cool. All right, thank you guys so much for your time.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Yes. All right.
I will. Okay.
Cool.